What's the alternative? Are you learning every single day by yourself? Are you learning on Friday? Are you learning on Shabbos? Are you learning on Sunday? If the answer is no, then this is for you. The other question you have to ask yourself is, if you learn all of prayer, if you learn all of Shabbos, when are you going to do that? And finally, the Zohar says, it's time to do that in the third possibility. If somebody can learn something in this world, when he gets to Shabbat, he will be able to learn that in the world, but his world will explain things better. Go through all of Shabbos, even if you don't remember it. Even if you don't really understand it, his world will explain it to you better. But if you don't learn it, you don't fully, you're not going to spark it. You're never better than people that shape you. And finally, one of the pitfalls that people have is when they miss it out, they won't miss it out. There's sickness, there's symptoms, there's addiction. And a mistake that these Americans people do is says you have to make it up. Don't come back to the shoe, let's make yourself first because I don't want to have a hole in my tomorrow and understand it. And that's a big mistake. Skip what you missed, go back to the shoe, go back to what cholesterol is holding, write down what you missed, and you'll make it up at a different time. But today, you must skip it. Don't fall for it. And don't be a perfectionist when it comes to that behavior. Don't say, well, I didn't finish this step, I don't want to do this. I need to finish. Because at the end of the day, if you finish $3,700 versus $2,711, it's not going to be the world. It's better to do that than not to do it at all. And now, let's just jump in. You get your shots. The Mishnah discusses Kriya Shema. First says, we will show the local reference if the rise and say Kriya Shema twice a day. When you go to sleep, nighttime, and when you arise in the morning. And what is nighttime? The Mishnah in the word reads down into 6 sheets. So sheet in the Mishnah says 6 and 5. And the Mishnah uses a lesson of when you're time you are covered. You go, you play ball, you lift up, and then you act out your problem to people who eat food. Until what point can you say Kriya Shema? The lesson says, until the end of the first Mishnah of the Malachim, the next is divided between, so the third is the next. So how do you say the Prophet says? How do you do that? And the Bill says, until I'm going to shock that, until the light of the Lord. In fact, Gemara says, Chachamim agree with the Bill that the time is, I'm going to shock that. But, how do you say, so it's not there, but it's one distance people from out there. You're going to see after the together, and he said, you must say Kriya Shema before that service. The same halacha applies to enter halal in Yibara and to, in other words, when the particular focus, the wings under the Mizbeach, and certain bodies that are only eaten for one day and night, such as the Chametz and Asham, the shear is until service. If the real shear would come to the Mishnah. The reason why our Mishnah starts with Kriya Shema B'Mayr and then Kriya Shema B'Shachris, 2 reasons. The one was the parents that would the Shach and then only afterwards we went to get up. Or because the previous one says that he better first the night and then the invited the day. As we mentioned before, the Shrupa after he's coming up, after he says he's coming, and then before he departed, because the prayer says, Oh Hashem Shrupa, the typical meaning was what it means when the sun comes up. The ball prayer means when the sun goes down, and it says that the day the light is gone. And now we go to the 6 sheets of the first order. Now, the Bible says the time of saying Kriya Shema is Shkia, that's when Shabbos comes in. Remember the first sheet that is slightly before it says Second, that's when they put our limit where Yeshua says, say Second, in the middle Shkia. That's when they put having to eat the true of their Daniel says, after it says Second, that's when 40 people sit down to eat. Maybe the second sheet that says, when you eat Friday night, it's slightly after that, and Rabbi says this, the latest night is when people sit down to eat and eat the meal at night, having wonderful living. We should be circled, finish shots together all day. Daf Gimel. Tremendous amount of that every single one of you who started shots, you should be so able to stay on board, stick it out, and finish shots with Hashem. Welcome to over 1,500 new subscribers in the last 24 hours. That brings us up to 7,500 new subscribers in the last 4 days, I think it is. Our goal initially was to get to 10,000 new subscribers during the Sema Shots. We're almost there. With your help, just send out the link, put it on your status, tell your friends about it. It'll make a tremendous Kiddush Hashem and a big difference. We learned in the Mishnah that Rabbi Eliezer could say Krishma until Soy Hashmur Rishayim, until the end, first of Mishnah. There are three Mishmars according to one sheet on Shemayim, and the Malach is Shira. And when one Mishmar ends and the next one begins, that's when we can say Krishma. The question is, if you divide the 9 into 3, it equals to 4 hours each. So why didn't you just say Krishma for 4 hours? And it's just to teach us that the Mishmars of Shemayim coinciding with the Mishmars down here. We also have Mishmars. For instance, the first Mishmar, you'll hear the donkeys neighing and making noise. The middle of the second Mishmar, you'll hear the dogs barking. And at the beginning of the third Mishmar, the babies wake up from nurse. And when a couple wakes up, when a wife starts talking to her husband, according to another shot, all 3 of these signs happen at the end of each Mishmar. The end of the third Mishmar is already daytime. I don't need a sign. But if you touch that in a dark room and your wife starts talking to you, or your baby wants a nurse, you know, it's time to say, Krishma. He roars like a lion 3 times a day. And he says, wow to the nation that because of my sons, I had to destroy my house, I had to burn my home, I had to set the place wrong develops. Says Rabbi, I was once on the way, I had an so I went off the path and I went to ruins. How are you? And I let him wait for me by the door. And when I finished, he said, Shalom. I said, Shalom, Rabbi, what are you doing here? So I had a daven. He said, daven, you daven on the way. You daven into the Tzara. So as we're going to say, I learned 3 things from it. First of all, you don't go into a Khurban. And if you're traveling, you daven on the way. And what do you daven? Tfilas Haminenu, Tfilas Tzara. And we don't know if you continue and ask him, what did you hear in the Khurban? He said, I heard a voice that sounded like a pigeon cooing. The pigeon was saying, or the voice was saying, oh, you're wondering, like you just said, that I had to be machim my house and burn the people, and I did not go place. Says that we don't know me. In the motion of a shua, the public shua, I swear to you, that his Baruch says this every single day, 3 times a day. When his Baruch sees fights are wrong in the shul, and they say, oh, my Yishmi Rabbi, he bows his head to the elbow, and it says, as he's tired of the elbow, he says, fights strong, and he goes. Why don't you go into a Khurban and ruins? There are 3 reasons. First is Hashan, suspicion. That's a reason if you're going with people, they're not that good. So you still have Hashan, but a person. Can you hear me? How'd you find out about it? How did you find out that? Well, you got it. How did you learn about my Discord? So will be with the Zayah. People say it was with the Zayah. The second reason is my friends were worried that the rumors will cave in. And that's a reason that you're going with 2 kosher people that you don't have to check. Finally, the third reason is Mazik and Shadim. If it's a brand new place and 2 people that are kosher, but it's in their place that the Mazik can let them hang it out, it's still interesting that you have 2 people. Or if it's just with 1 person, or you're by yourself, and you're in a field. So there's no women, there's no shot. Yet, there's Mazik. Rabbi says that the night consists of 4 mishmars. In other words, 3 hours each. The Rabbi says, you woke up every night at sunset and says, 80 Ashmaras. I woke up 2 mishmaras before that. Now, if you hold that there are only 3 mishmaras in the night, and you won't woke up with sunset, which is in the middle of the night, that means there's only 1.5 mishmaras left. How do we reconcile this? So the Gemara, because our Rabbi was saying they woke up 6 hours for the end of the night, plus 2 hours. His kings can sleep 2 hours per day. Basically, you woke up 8 hours before everyone else. 8 hours divided by 2 equals hours. In other words, it was 2 mishmaros that he woke up before the other. Yes, it was only 6 hours of nighttime. 1.5 mishmaros. It was 8 hours before the king. It was 2 mishmaros and 4 hours each. But Rashi says to call 1.5 mishmaros mishmaros. 2 mishmaros. The Gemara says, I love that. In front of the dead person, it's not fucking learning. Because it's learning the rush. Since the dead person can't fucking learning, he'll feel better. Unless you talk and learning the dead person was Mechadish. Another Chinese Gemara is you shouldn't talk any shtoyot. You shouldn't say anything in front of the mace. It still makes you feel bad unless you're talking about the mace himself. There's a contradiction in the Sukim. One person says that the Rabbi woke up at Chatzos. The other person says they woke up before the night. The Gemara has three shots. Either the Rabbi saying, I never slept as Chatzos, or he said that I was learning Torah on the Chatzos, like a horse that dozes off, but he's learning in his dozing. And then at that point on, he was gathering our views, strengthening himself like that. One of the shot is until Chatzos in Torah, and then for Chatzos on, he places heroes. This is buffers. The word Nefesh means when something goes away, when the night becomes day, or when the day becomes night. The Rabbi says, Chatzis Laila Uncle, I wake up at Chatzis. So in other words, the Rabbi knew what Chatzis was, and on the other hand, it seems like Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know what Chatzis was, because he says, Chatzis Laila is inspiring Chatzis. Almost at Chatzis. Or Moshe Rabbeinu the Gemara. Either the Rabbi knew what Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know, because the Rabbi had his keynote, his heart, which told him exactly what Chatzis was. Or the shot is Moshe Rabbeinu also knew, just the Rabbi needed his keynote in order to awaken him. Third shot is Moshe Rabbeinu knew what Chatzis was, and just worried that people will say Moshe Rabbeinu, he's lying Moshe Rabbeinu, so that's why I said Chatzis. They don't catch him on his word. Or the shot is that Moshe Rabbeinu on the 13th of Nisan, he said, Chatzis, just like now, tomorrow, Chatzis, tomorrow, the Shor will take place for out of Mitzrayim. By the Shach, the word tells us, Chacham Yisrael came into the Melech. It means one time they came in. Every day we come in the Shach, about what they came in, he said, we need Taras and By Yisrael. So the Melech, let them do business with each other. And if I told him it's not enough, if I said everybody, he said, go out to war. He says, no, I want to go out to war. You ask not to go. In other words, strategy of war, you get from out the Torah. Yoda means you ask for Shus from some country. Yosa means you ask for Purim and Yoda, Lenin War, had a wonderful day. Racha is the Abdallah. I'd like to thank each and every one of you. A few months back, I found out that my sister-in-law got sick. That day, I started thinking about it. Just recently, I promised her that for Schusim and Fush Lema, I would try to get 10,000 new subscribers for the Yisrael Hashas. In fact, today, Baruch Hashem, the George Schools, we achieved that monumental occasion, and Shoshana Braziv Asilko should have a Fush Lema. I also like to thank over 1,500 people who viewed the regular 42-minute cheer. You can find that on YouTube, search under Elvis Bansky, Rabbi Shemish Dafyomi, and subscribe. The Pasuk says in Tehillim, David HaMelech says, Shomer Nafshi, Chosid Ani. David HaMelech has a Bechon, don't think I'm a Chosid, shut. Don't think I'm a Chosid compared to the other kings of the world who get up 3 hours a day, and I get up at Chatzos. Or the other kings, they sit around and when I have this local rabbi, I check it out afterwards with my fingers, I get my hands bloody to make sure that women are harder to their husbands. I'm a chassid. I ask Mikiboishes, known as Ishboishes. The reason why it's called Mikiboishes is because he embarrasses the Rav asks him questions and he says, is this tar, is this kosher? And he embarrasses him by Allah. It's that much better than David Allah. But David got his revenge, so to speak. When he had a son Daniel, he was called Hillel because he was able to embarrass Mikiboishes in Allah. It says in the famous passage, in Latin, literally is the Hashem. The word Lulei has depends on time. Who does? The Rabbi wasn't sure that he was Zaycha, and the reason is because he was worried perhaps he'll sin and won't be Zaycha. As we see, but after Rabbi, even after 12 times for Shemira protection, it says in the Pasuk by Yira Yaakov, he was worried. Why? Shema Yibur. In fact, we see that the fact that it was a Ezra should have had the same kind of nisim of Chris Yamsuf as Israel had the first time when they went to Israel. And the reason why he wasn't such is because Torah Rafah. According to Rabbi Eliezer, we know that the Shafach means when people go to sleep, the time that they go to bed, which is a 4-hour period from the time that it turns dark and Shmur Shana. According to Rabbi Eliezer, the Shafach doesn't mean when you go to bed, it means when you are sleeping, which means the entire night, all the way till Amir Shafach. Comment, and you need to remember that that's what the word Shafach means. But we say that we only say creation of different size, that the distance a person from an idea. We are concerned that a person will come home from work, hardly work on the field, and eat a little bit, and say, let me take a little nap, and he'll fall asleep for the rest of the night, and that will be Chayv Misa. Why is the Gemara so strong with its language? It's Chayv Misa. Because sleep is very dangerous. If you try to take a short nap, fall asleep for the rest of the night, another shot is I want to tell you, Myra is not what it shows. It's ugly for it. You say Kriyashma, it says in the Gemara, and then immediately you say Shemana Esrei, and that goes according to beautiful. That says that you saw that you put it together. When you mention it's Mitzrayim, you have to say Shemana Esrei immediately. Rashi explains beautifully that is because first, praise of his powerful, and Rabbi Yochanan, you open up his heart, and once his heart is open, you can jump in and ask for your tzrochim and say Shemana Esrei. Shmuel Levi says, don't say Kriya Shema then Shemana Esrei. Obviously, say Shemana Esrei then Kriya Shema. Make a sandwich. When you wake up in the morning, you say Kriya Shema then Shemana Esrei, then Shemana Esrei, and Kriya Shema. In other words, it's Kriya Shema on both sides. Why was the Shaila? The question is whether we consider the Gulas Mitzrayim, the main part happened during the day, but perhaps as we're going from, there's a little bit that started at night, and therefore at night also that we say Shmuel says no. The main thing happened in the day, and that's what we need to concentrate on. Or the question is, the Shafach the method is a package between laying down and getting up. According to Rabbi Yochanan, just like when you get up, you have to say Kriya Shema and then Shemana Esrei, so you will go to sleep, say Kriya Shema and Shemana Esrei. Shmuel Levi says there's a package. Learn from the package is that when you get up, you say Kriya Shema. In other words, Kriya Shema is closer to the sleep. So that also, first say Shemana Esrei, then you say Kriya Shema, so that Kriya Shema is closer to the sleep. If you have to say Kriya Shema and then immediately Shemana Esrei, why is it that during Myra you have brachas in the Shema and Shemana Esrei? And that's what once the Chachamim will decide on it, it's considered it's a long expression of the Tzitz Mitzrayim, and for the same reason we say Hashem's Chasayit Mitzvah, Tefillah Gitli Yosefa, it's a Tefillah room, it's part of Shemana Esrei. Whoever says Ashrei 3 times a day, the famous saying is Muftach Leishon Benag Ma'avah, because Ashrei contains the Seder of Aleph, every pasuk starts Aleph, and then the second pasuk plays Gimel, and the other reason is it's a combination of these two reasons. The famous pasuk of the Seder is Seder from the Seder. Notice Ashrei is missing the pasuk that starts with Nun. That pasuk talks about a Klal Yisrael falls and doesn't get up. In Eretz Yisrael, they learned that pasuk that Klal Yisrael fell down, but they get up from the fall. As the Ramel had a rule of Hakadosh, he said right away, the following letter, Samach, Soynech Hashem Yifal Anochel, will go from lift up those who fall. The Lord tells us that Malach Mifal, when he flies, it's non-stop. But Gabriel has a stopover. He makes one stop. So basically he has 2 flights. The Rabbi has 4 flights. In other words, there's 3 stops. The Malach Hamas has 8 flights. The Malach Hamas has 7 stops. We want the person to be able to do tshuva, and we make it part of the Malach Hamas to arrive at his destination. Yet there's a Mandeifa many people are dying, then the Malchus has a direct flight. The True Lady says that there's a mitzvah to say Kriyish Mal HaMikvah, you see the pasuk brings you up at home, you go down from Amishkafim, laying down, you say Kriyish. However, the Malchus constantly repeats his Torah, these Chazaras, perhaps watches the Eid Dav, not really. A Chacham like that doesn't have to say Kriyish Mal HaMikvah. Rabbi says, even if I'm a Chacham, should at least say one pasuk. For instance, Yad Fav the Ruchi, besides the Hashem like them, Hashem, Taik, Emes. Wonderful. For us, that thing. I'd like to apologize. We're simply overwhelmed by the vast amount of new subscribers that we just had in recent days, and it's very difficult for us to get the video out to everybody. We're working on it with modern technology. Hopefully, in the next few days, we'll have it all sorted out. The Gemara says that a person should use his Yetzer Hara in a battle against his Yetzer Hara constantly. If that doesn't work, he should learn Torah. If he sees that it's not beating the Yetzer Hara, he should say Kriyish Mal. It's still not working. He should remind himself of Yom HaMisa, the day of his death. This has come as a surprise to some people that even Shas, all of Shas, came down to Moshe Rabbeinu on Sinai. As we learn in the Pasuk, the Etam of Chas Luchais Ha'evan, that's referring to Luchais, that starts with Dibros, Ba'al Torah. The one is required to learn Torah. Chamish Kush Torah. The Mitzvah is referring to Mishnayos. Asher Pesachti is Yadi Mitzvah. What you write up. How do I get halacha? From Gemara. You cannot derive halacha from a Mishnah, rather from Gemara, and all these came from Moshe Sinai. The Gemara discusses Kriyish Mal HaMikvah. The Kriyish Mal HaMikvah acts as a double-edged sword to kill away the Mazikim, and the Shosh says to get rid of the sword. It says, remember, I need a pasuk for that. Every kid knows that the pasuk says if you do everything that Rabbi tells you from a machloek, something Israel, a single level, Torah is something that gets rid of the sword. Since you're going to don't work for Chazal, then 12% terribly discerned. So the Gemara doesn't act like a regular kid. A regular person who gives a present when he sells something, he's upset. The Baruch Hu gave us the Torah and he's excited about it. He says, if a person has a surah, and this is a sight for life, the person should introspect, check, see what metaphor is this surah. If he doesn't, if he can't figure it out, he should assume it's because he's not learning Torah in the Torah. And if not, he should understand that Sisur Shalahava, the concept of both is Sisurim in order to double your Sakar and Oil Haba. The Shbaruch says in the Gemara, it's Sisurim for the people he loves. On one condition, that those people accepted the Ahava, and if they do, they'll be Zaychal, children, and Rimas younger. The Machlokes, if Sisurim Shalahava is only a situation where it doesn't create the Torah, but one man knows only a situation where it doesn't create the Tefillah, and the Torah, even if it creates the Torah and the Tefillah, it's still considered the Surim Shalahava. More than the Kalachaymer. If a slave leaves his master when his master knocks out his teeth or his eye, certainly the Surim, which take hold of the entire body, they should give you a Kafaras Hamayis. Rabbi Yochanan says, and this is also a great insight for life. Anything good comes with a struggle. The Lord gave us 3 gifts, and they all came with a struggle. He gave us the Torah, He gave us the Yisrael, and He gave us the Oil Haba. If a person is involved in learning, or in Vidus Chasadim, or Rahman Islam buries his children, says the Gemara, all his Averis are clear. The Rabbi says, although Tzaras is considered a kafar on his Mizbeach, yet it's not considered Yisur Shalachava. Those Yisur, the difference is, those Yisur come to take away Chatoim and Avodas. Haveris. Yisurim Shel Ahava, as we mentioned, means that it comes to double your Safai. To make a distinction, says the Gemara, perhaps somebody has Sarat and Eretz Yisrael, where he has a lot of Kushab, it's very embarrassing, he has to leave the Machane, he has to leave the Katan, then that's considered not Yisurim Shel Ahava, but it's in Chutz La'aretz, in America, in Bavel, if you have Sarat, that's Yisurim Shel Ahava. So another distinction to make is if the Yisurim are visible to others, if Sarat is visible to others, that's not Yisurim Shel Ahava, but if Sarat is covered, it's Yisurim Shel Ahava. Famous Lashon of Rabbi Yochanan had 10 boys that were nifter, and he carried on himself a bone of one of his children, of the last child that died, and he said, "They garma that's here. This is a reminder of the Yisurim of a hava that Hakadosh Baruch Hu gave me. Because Rabbi Yochanan was a tzaddik, he didn't have Yisurim that weren't Shel Ahava. The Gemara makes a distinction. If a person who never has children, that's not Yisurim Shel Ahava. If a person of long Islam loses a child, that's Yisurim Shel Ahava. Here, Abba was sick, and Rabbi Yochanan went to visit him. And Rabbi Yochanan asked him, "Are you happy to do Yisurim?" And he says, "No, I'd rather not have Yisurim, and I'd rather not have the Safar." The explanation is because it causes me to do the fire. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Give me your hand," and he gave him his hand, and he healed him. Rabbi Yochanan himself was sick, but he couldn't heal himself because in a person cannot take himself out of jail. Rabbi Yochanan said the same thing. He says, "I'd rather not have this room, I'd rather not have the Safari." And Abba took his hand and healed Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan once visited Rabbi Lazar, who was also sick, and he saw that his house was dark. He rolled up his sleeve, and it became light in the house. Rabbi Yochanan's skin shined. And he asked him, "Why are you crying? If you're crying about the Torah that you didn't accomplish, the famous concept, that's what the Margot, the Mabek, the Rashi, doesn't matter. The quantity, it's the quality that counts. But if you're crying because you don't have enough, so not everybody has shulchanot, tables. You have time which you have in that. He says, "For the Lord, I'm crying about you, about the beautiful face, your beauty that one day is going to be buried." He explained, because Yochanan Mashal explains, that Yochanan was the last of the beautiful people that lasted from Purim of Ice. And that's the end of an era. So they both sat and they cried. Rav Huna, 400 of his barrels became vinegar. Chacham came to Matthias him, and they said, "Listen, you have to look into what you've done. There's a reason." And they said, "What questioned me?" And they told him they knew. They knew that he did something. And they said, "What questioned you? We're that he did something without a reason." You see from here, every Yisroel, all the Yisroel that we had, was the husband. And he said, "I don't know. You tell me." And he said, "Well, perhaps he didn't pay your sharecropper." And he said, "Well, the sharecropper's in Ghana. He stole from me. That's why I didn't pay." And he said, "Nevertheless, even though he's in Ghana, if you steal from him, then you taste a little bit of the Gneva." So he said, "Okay, I accept it by myself. I'll pay him back." And in fact, either all his 400 barrels became wine, or the price of vinegar became higher than wine. Abba bin Yomin died before he did any malacha and before he ate. And Rashi says it's transferred before he learned prayer. He says, "You don't understand what Rashi says. Of course, you can learn before davening. You should put your bed between north and south because the Shekhinah is facing east and west. And if you do so, you'll have one Mischarim and the wife that Miss Harry had a wonderful day." Bracha is that vav. If we have the capacity to see Shayda, we'd be so scared that we wouldn't survive it. All around us, and many of them, many more than us. In fact, each person has 1,000 Shaydim on his right side and 10,000 Shaydim on his left side. And you blame the Shaydim for everything. The fact that our clothing is, that our feet knock each other, that our knees are weak, that when we go to a shear, it feels as if it's crowded. It's all the Shaydim that we can blame. If you want to see evidence of Shaydim, you take ashes and put it by your bed, and in the morning you can see footprints that look like those of a chicken. want to see them, that's kind of dangerous. You can if you take a black cat, a female black cat, who's the eldest, who's the daughter of another black female eldest cat. You take the afterbirth, burn it, the ashes, and you can try to strip, and it actually damaged them because the mother had damage for them to be healed. Abba Binyamin continues to say halachas, and he says that tefillah is heard only in the children. It says, "Shmoya elarina elatfillah." The place that is rina, that is sitting, there is where the damage takes place. The Baruch was found in a shul, and he comes towards the minyan. He actually comes before the minyan gets there. The Baruch was there when you're doing the Torah, when the Dayanim, the Torah is considered Torah. The Baruch was there when a person is learning Torah. The Baruch was even there when a person is learning by himself. The difference between when a person is learning by himself and Chavusa is that Chavusa is specifically written down in a sefer that's for everybody to see. Yet for an individual, in his own private sefer, that's how Moses explains it. It says in the Pasuk, famous Gemara, a person thinks about doing it. He had a kindness and he couldn't do the mitzvah, will get schar as if he did it in the mitzvah. Hadish Baruch Hu wears tefillin. Hadish Baruch Hu says, Klal Yisrael gave me this one great shvat. He said, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. I'm going to say, we come from Yisrael, beautiful daughters. What does Hadish Baruch Hu put in his tefillin? And one of the bakim he has, Kimi Goy Gadol, and the parasha Kimi Goy Gadol. In the second bias, it says Ashrecha Yisrael, and the parasha of Mita Hapcha. In the third bias, it says Vayat Yisrael Akim, and the fourth bias, it says Elyon. If a person is used to coming to the shul and he doesn't show up, the Baruch asks him about it. Where's this guy? If he finds out that it's because he went for bar mitzvah, the person will have light. If he finds out they went for prior shuls, even to make a parnasa, he won't have light. Time brings this Gemara, and the time says it's impossible, but the Baruch tells the person that this is what a person is going to earn this year. Rosh Hashanah comes. It's impossible that if a person has more than time to go daven and to go learn, and he takes that time instead of learning, he goes and he earns a parnasa. It's impossible that Baruch will take away from the burden that he's supposed to earn. In other words, he should stay and learn, and nothing will happen. It will make the same amount of money. The version says that the Baruch comes to show that the meaning is not really miyad koyes. If it says meaning, the person has a permanent place. So he's davening that he's like a Ravino, and it says that Ezra, Hashem will help him. And when he dies, they say, who's this Anna, who's this Chassid, the child of Abraham? When you go towards the shul, you should run. When you leave the shul, you don't run, because it looks as if you're running away from the shul. On Shabbos, when it's supposed to run, you're allowed to run it. It's encouraged to run to shul. The Gemara has a list of things that what we might perceive that you get schar for, it's in fact something else. You go to shul and listen to speech, you don't really understand the speech, you get the schar not for listening to the prayer, but rather for walking to shul. The schar for arguing and learning is the schar that you get for the tircha, for the amilas haTorah that you get from coming up with the sweat. The schar that you have going to a base of Avot, to be Menachem Avot, is not to talk. The opposite. Sh'tikusa is being quiet is what's preferred. When you fast, on a fast day, you think that the schar is for fasting. In fact, the schar is even greater when you give money to the poor person to break his fast. The schar of fasting, somebody saying a hesped is not in the speech that you give, but rather in the crying that you do. And the schar that you have in Hong Chasana is the schar from Hong Chasana. Great things. If you daven in the shul, outside of the shul, according to Rashi, means opposite of Darim Kodesh, that wall, and your back is towards Darim Kodesh. So the Russian where it says a story that Abdullah Nabi, that's somebody that's davening outside the shul, and the back is towards Darim Kodesh, so shooting around, and Abdullah Nabi took out a sword and killed the person. It says in the Pasuk, these are the things that people are used to, such as davening, and people disregard the davening, they don't treat it with proper respect. The Berlin says, Krum is a lashon of a bird. The person he's being supported by others, he has a certain chance that his face turns to the color of his bird called wool. Not only that, he is evil, he is Midai, gave him a punishment with H matter, fired him. The Gemara says you must be careful with all three tefillos. Mincha, you see that Rabbi used answer during Mincha. Rabbi it says Mincha Zer, and the Shachris it says Hashem Boiker Tishma Koyin. If you benefit from a wedding without creating a wedding, the fertilize this is possible. Sasa, soup, and second. Artists are made for benefits from like toilets. But the creation of the sausage was very well possible. It says that you really took the vision. Some say that when you go to the wedding, it's as if you brought a toilet. Or it's as if you built one of the rulers in July, because also the creation of the safe house. It says, the usher is from the artist. If your friend says hello to you, you should try to say hello before your friend does. Because it says because it back and shoulder and you should see out this. Now, if your friend says hello to you, you start him out, you don't say hello back, you consider the Gazlan. It says in the Pasuk, the Lashon of Zela Sanim. You're a poor person, you don't have anything. All you have is the ability to say hello, and somebody stole that ability from you, that other person. It's a Gazlan. Wonderful. Prophet is not saying. The Lord tells us that even if it's both David, what does he say? What does he say to him? The Lord says he says it himself. It's actually the same exact word as the famous song, just says to himself. The famous song, Tanya, Homer, Shmuel, and Elisha. Amachas, Nasi, and Hachas, and parents, and most of them, and this Amidah, to serve a Baruch with Paris, to release the Shmuel, Pash, and Tzvokos, and so on Baruch himself. Elisha is sitting, Omer, Lin, Omi, Baruch, give me Baruch. The mighty God, you what's it for that for your mercy should overcome your anger. As the Lord is going to explain it, with Prophet's anger. And your mercy should overcome your midos. This is like children with mercy. And then and he shook his head and he Prophet says it a little differently. He says the same words. He says, what do we learn from the Shmuel? We learn that Prophet could ask the Prophet for a bus for the dog. He gave it to him so that any bus for the dog, even a hedyot, I'll see it because hedyot tells me, even a hedyot, a simple person will give you Prophet and should enjoy and benefit. We learn from the Prophet that you don't appease a person and he's still angry. You don't really calm down. The Prophet says, wait until I'm not angry. When does that mean? Every single day, for a single second, for a 16th of a second, what it says, 108,888. One part of that, which is the 16th of a second. Or the amount of time it says that it takes to say the word rega. That Bilam knew that second. Bilam wasn't that smart. His own donkey beat him in an argument. And if you knew that split second, if you know that split second, you could use it to curse somebody in the first words. In fact, it is powerful that Bilam was about to curse Yisrael, so he didn't get mad those few days. When he got angry those few days, Chas v'shalom, there wouldn't be anything done. Going to the story, Shulman Levi was set at a certain school who was bothering him. He wanted to kill him. What he did was, he took a chicken and tied it to his bed. He's a civic. When the chicken's coat turns from red to white, that's the kind of what it's said. And he waited there, and he noticed that he fell asleep. And he realized it's a sign of Shemayi, and that's supposed to be said. The Rashi of the Quran says, even on the bed, we're going through that thing. When the kings of the world, the people of the crown, the bed of the sun. person has self-discipline. It comes from within himself. It's not from outside. It's a lot better than if somebody would hit him and give him levels. So the reflection is better than 100 levels. That says the Gemara that Moshe Rabbeinu asked for 3 things, and he got all 3 things according to one number. He asked that Klal Yisrael should have Shekhinah. He asked that the should not have Shekhinah. He also asked that to understand why is it that sometimes Tzaddik Rabbi, the good guy, he sometimes has a bad life, and sometimes Rosh of the Kohen, the bad guy has a really good life, supposedly. He was told that one shot is Tzaddik Rabbi. You come to Tzaddik, it's not Tzaddik Rabbi. Tzaddik Rabbi, you wouldn't have that. What's the shot? The powerful wants to get a person to be screwed so that Tzaddik is not a governor, should be governor. And Rosh of the Kohen, the powerful wants to erase all the schools in this world, even the Scattering schools when it comes to the Kohen HaGadol, you shouldn't have that. The mayor says that Moshe Rabbeinu said, I want to see I offered you like standing food. Now you want, I'm not eating it. He says, more Benson says, this time that Moshe Rabbeinu covered his face, he was such a big that he knew that his face glowed. It's a fire that Moshe Rabbeinu was fearful of Hashem, so he was fearful of him, that he would get this fire. He didn't look at me, but he showed him this afira. What is afira? It says in the Gemara, show him that not what he feels from it. When I put both says something, promises something, even if it's connected to the condition, if the condition doesn't happen, the Prophet still will fulfill his word. For instance, the Prophet said, I want to kill all guys from you. And don't worry about your Rabbeinu. I'll make you the green nation. And then you didn't kill guys from you. You didn't worry for your Rabbeinu, your nation. In fact, what your Rabbeinu had as we started off 600,000 Muslims. Jordan says the name of the Shema Rabbi was the first one to call Israel master, author. And when Daniel was saved, he was in the merit of Abraham who called the Leah was the first one who wanted to touch his heart. The praise like him, realized that when a Shema was moving with Jesus. The name Yehuzay, Gemara, is made out of 2 words. Hey, see my son. Leah was saying, look at Esau. He sold his affair willingly and complained. And he said that Yaakov took it away illegally. My son, who lost his affair to Esau, yet he didn't complain. Not only that, he wasn't jealous and tried to stay. He said, it's living the other. It makes it worse. How to describe David HaMelech, that it seems Shira is prophets in this world. In fact, we see that the mission of a person has a tremendous effect on the person. A son, a kid, who's rebellious, is worse than the war of the mother with his parents. And you want to ask the question, when David HaMelech was running away from his own son, Absalom, which would be the worst thing in the world, yet David HaMelech says, he's more than David. He's saying a phrase that makes powerful. He knows David. David HaMelech was relieved. Like the person came off and beat to death. It's upsetting, but it's a relief. He's relieved that if you go home, you're going to have rebellion with everything you have. And when you leave the house, and you thought perhaps it's a monster or a planet, but if you leave it, it's his own son. His own son's not going to kill him. When are you allowed to start off with a bad guy? In Russia, there are 4 ways. Either when it's really the Shmaya, it's not a mundane thing. Otherwise, it might be dangerous. Or if you're Russian, he's not having a good time. It's not a good time for the Russian in his life. He's on the down. So on the down, you're not going to go after him. Or he's on the up. He's doing really well. But you're a Tzaddik Gomer. Tzaddik Gomer, go after him. The other thing is, even if he's not a Tzaddik Gomer, you go after Russia if it's not a good time. The person sets a permanent seat in his home, then his enemies fall in front of him. And finally, the Gemara says it's better to serve and suffer than to learn from him as wonderful ways. Bracha is Daf Ches. Today must be one of the highlights of the Daf career. I was saying over the Gemara, Tanya, Omer Mishmal ben Elisha, when suddenly one guy started singing the famous Avraham Creed song, and then the entire group, 60, 70 guys together, was an unbelievable failure. If you want to be part of a Shema Chevra, a fun, entertaining cheer, check us out on YouTube on the Rabbi Stefanski. Understand why there are close to 3,000 subscribers. Now look at this. If a person has an illness, he's sick, and he can't make it to shul, and he can't gather 10 people to his home, it's preferable that he should daven at the same time that you're davening at shul. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't turn down the tefillah of the tzibur of the rabbi. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, whoever learns Torah, does midos chasadim, and davens with a minyan, it's as if they redeem me and my children from within the nations. The Shlosh says, if there's a shul in a city and he doesn't go in, he's considered a bad neighbor. And because of him, he creates galus for him and for his children. But Rabbi was under the impression that there are no extremely old people in the Bible. Because it says in the Gospel, "Man, you make it," that's referring to Israel. When he found that there were old people, he said it must be because they come to shul early in the morning and they leave shul late at night, and that is Arichas Yom. The Chisda says one should not sit right by the door, the entrance of the shul, so it looks as if he wants to run away from shul. Rather, he should give himself 2 doors distance into the shul. The Gemara brings 4 pshatim from this pasuk. Every chassid, pious person, should daven for this right before he needs this thing and go get it to be davened for. What is this thing? The first pshat is, Rabbi says, is referring to looking for a wife. It says in the pasuk, "Matzah isha, matzah taif." The matzah matches matzah in the pasuk. In fact, in Israel, they would ask, "Matzah or matzah?" After you're married, now that you find out the woman you married, is she a matzah, matzah isha, matzah taif? Is it a good woman, or matzah ni marmi mavis is a isha? And Rashi says it's referring to Torah. You should ask for Torah and you'll receive it. Rabbi says you should ask for kfura, for burial. The Rabbi says it's talking about death. You should ask for a good death, a pleasant death. In fact, what it says there are 950 types of death. The worst one is askara. That's one is Mrs. Nashika, like taking a hair out of milk. Askara is like taking thorns out of wool. It's very difficult. So you should ask for a good misa. My Sutra says it's referring to a bathroom. You should find a good bathroom. The word says, in fact, my Sutra seems to be the best out of all of them. Says Rav Chisda. It says in the pasuk, "Oyav Hashem Shari Tzion B'Kol Mishkanei Yaakov." What does Hashem love the most? He loves Oyav Hashem Sha'orma Mitzviyon Ba'alacha. He likes the places that they come to the bottom of the halacha more than shuls and button medrash. Halacha is one should daven where he learns. When Rabbi heard this halacha, he changed his ways. He used to learn at home and go daven in shul. But then he changed it to where he would daven and learn in the same place. Rabbi and Rasi, they had 13 shuls in Tveria, yet they chose to daven by the pillars of where they used to learn. It says, in the time the Korban Abayis, the Korban only has 4 Amis and Halachas. In other words, that's why Abayim also he decided to daven in the same place that he learned Halacha. That's why the Korban. Gemara says somebody who has Yerushalayim and earns a living is greater than somebody that earns that just has Yerushalayim without earning. It says in the pasuk, "Yagia kapecha tzachal ashrecha v'toivlah." You learn ashrecha v'toivlah and v'toivlah, whereas just Yerushalayim only has a v'toivlah and not a v'toivlah. There's halacha that one should live right next to his Rabbi. If he's subordinate to his Rabbi, if he accepts everything his Rabbi says, otherwise it's not good to live next to your Rabbi. You see that Shlomo HaMelech didn't marry Dora of Chari as long as his Rabbi Shimon ben Geri was alive and lived next to him. It says in the pasuk, there's a halacha that if the secretary is over in the shul, you're not allowed to leave the shul. The Rabbi would leave the shul between Garba and Garba between Aliyahs. The Rabbi asks, what about between Psukim? There's a pause, can you sneak out? And he remains with the cycle. Reb Shimon says, I turn my back to the same time and I learn they're doing what they want to do and I'm doing my thing. Allah Shneimikra Mephatargum brings Aritas Yamek. You should say Sukkim and one Targum. What if there's no Targum on the Pasuk? After some deeper. Says Rashi, in that case, the Gemara says you should still say it, meaning you should say the Pasuk 3 times, once, instead of the Targum. One should not wait until Yom Kippur to say the Targum because the Yom Kippur day that we eat is as if you're fasting, and you do not say Targum earlier than the week that you need to say that. The True Levi told his children, first of all, when you shut the bird, be careful that you shut all the breathing, the veins, make sure that all the blood comes out. Be careful with the cough on the something that had Torah, even though you forget it now because of Abaydas, just like they put the broken Mukhais into the Haran. This person is a broken Sefer Torah. Rabbi told his children, do not cut meat on your hands. One shot is because it's a sakana, you might slit, and cut your hand, or you might nick your hand, some of the blood will go into the food, and it'll disgust everybody. The other is, you're not allowed to sit on a mito aramis. One shot is, it's referring to going to sleep without saying Krishma Amito. The other shot is, Rabbi was telling his children who had him to not marry a Gieres because you're going to toss it. And some say that it's a Goya Mammoth. Why can't you sit on a bed? The stories were about a woman told him, a guy said, sit down, and he said, let me see what's underneath the bed. And she lifted up the bed, and it was dead baby, and she wanted to blame him for his death. Well, if it is, one should not go behind a shul. It looks as if you don't believe in the shul. One says there's a number of conditions here. If a person is carrying something heavy, it's obvious that he's not trying to go in the shul. He's wearing tefillin, it's obvious that he's in Shemayim. If he's running, it's also obvious that he's trying to get somewhere. And if the shul has another door, then people think he's trying to go to another door, and instead of he's going to the shul. Rabbi Akiva loved 3 things about the nation of Moab, that they put their meat, they don't put their meat on the table, and they would kiss each other only on their hands because of germs, and when they discuss private things, they would go into a field so nobody else could hear. Rabbi Akiva says, I like 3 things that the Persian did. They had sneers in 3 areas: when they ate, when they went to the bathroom, and when they had relations. Nevertheless, the Persian are ready to go with all these sneers. They're ready to go straight into the air. The other thing is like when we will in the Mishnah, they can say Kriya Shema all the way until Abura Shachar. Shimon says that there's a possibility of saying Kriya Shema one after another. One will be for the night, one will be for the day. That is, you say Kriya Shema right before Abura Shachar, and right after Abura Shachar, the one after Abura Shachar will count for the daytime, even though logically right after Abura Shachar is considered the night. Since people get up then, the Yotza, Kriya Shema Shachar, have a wonderful day. Rabbi is Daf test. What tells the story? He tells them that he came home from a wedding to Rabbi. And they didn't say Kriya Shema. They asked him to the father of the cousin whether or not they can say Kriya Shema, even though it's the Netzach Shabbos. So it says, yes, your husband is like a true by a foot, that in the time of a virus, like being drunk, you can say Kriya Shema of Meir all the way to the next. That's the halacha. You're supposed to say Kriya Shema of Meir all the way to the next. If that doesn't work out, you have a problem with Hashem. Only in the case of the virus, you go to the Netzach Shabbos. In our mission, we had that the sons from Yirmiyah, they also went to a wedding, but they didn't have a goodness. And they asked from Yirmiyah, he said, yes, up until Abura Shachar. Because they weren't sure whether or not the Chachamim or the Rabbi argued with their father or not. They knew their father was they weren't sure if Chachamim agreed. And he said, yes, Chachamim agreed with me. The share really is up until Abura Shachar. Chachamim made it a kind of siyah, sacred Shema before that says. Elizabeth Zari has zero show. It's an extra word chesed. It learns out that the time keeping from Pesach is only up until Tzatzos, which the Kiva holds, time keeping from Pesach is all the way to the morning. What Kiva learns from the word for puzzle. Puzzle we hold is the hastiness of the highest from which they can read and hastiness in the morning, so therefore you need to from Pesach to the morning. Elazar holds that puzzle is referring to the Mitzrayim. They weren't in rush to get Pesach. reality, the place from only left is following. There's a pasuk that seemingly has two-way contradiction. It says, "Shal tizvah pesach." When do you shal pesach? Which means in the afternoon. It says, referring to Shkia. It says, "Oh yeah, it says somebody to try to make a place where we can in the morning." So which one is it? Is it Shkia or the morning? What's it telling us to do? Shkita of the carton base happens in that eating of the carton base occurs only after Shkia. Whether Yeshua, which is like it, all in the morning, or if the cause are, it's a total offense. Or now goes on to explain a few super. When the Torah told us Rabbi Israel to borrow bonus from the mitzvah, the pasuk is an interesting notion. Rabbi no, but Osle, but on the Isha. What's this no? I beg of you, please. Before I talk about Rabbeinu, I don't want all my people to fulfill the titles. I promise that the mitzvah will slave my soul, but that the after the peace, that they should borrow all the sleep. So the Roma unit doesn't have and Christ said, we don't want to borrow. We want to leave. If we can leave, why should we wait until tomorrow? Let's leave right now. Vayashiku, with the minute that says Rabbi means that it happens for us. What happened for us? And what she says, that the mitzvah will force. What she says, I just want to borrow. She felt that it might be too heavy, and either borrow into this one might give chase. They wanted to go lighter. And therefore, they are Christ will force. And that's the time says the moral that once Christ will part from the mitzvah, everything was it was as if it's a trap for animals to out of it. Boy, by nothing, it's like just like in the depths of the ocean, there are no fish. So too, the trap has values left. What's the couple Russian and talking from the Israel? Just like I was saying now, how we just them to go. Israel has a picture head. Why should I tell them about future gods? Says you're going to be right. Just tell them I'll be with them. What's the double play we are? And maybe Hashem and make story of the they are about that they are false. So we had them try to consume the meat with fire which might didn't work. And that's the relays, bring down fire from Shemayim and consume the meat. That's what happened. And maybe the second time was why is such a thing? It's witchcraft to understand that witchcraft. Says the Mishnah. Witchcraft in the morning is said when the friendship between faithless and love. This is faithless and love. That's witchcraft. We had the opportunity today, the owner of the faithless, and gave us a lot of inspiration and nervous things. The Gemara says that it's faithless is within the love of peace of God. Must have died in the when the friendship between the life and the blue, that's the shooter. That's what we say. The Lezer says the faithless and comparison. Comparison is a lead. So when you go to friendship between the blue and the green, that's the shear of fear. The same shear brings it another way with the friendship between a dog and a wolf, between a donkey and a rider, a wild donkey. And our favorite say it's when you can differentiate, when you pick up your friend or an acquaintance, an associate from 4 hours. Up until what time you see Krishma, once you get until next family, that's the most appeal of everything going to turn. The short says until hours, it's money, it's not easy, the right thing. Before the light, that's the thing you brought this thing. And the room says you start from a shasai, the gun says you start from a shama, and that's when you wake up 3 hours into the day. Krishna says, you have a reach Krishna. Past this time, at least there'll be a kindness of the rights of moving the fire. And it explains his finish. He says because this person is saying about that. The person decided to get back, unless he gets it back. Rabbi says the Allah is that Krishna can be said the sheer of keeping out your friend around us away. Rabbi says no, that's only in regard to tefillah. But Krishna is the type of person that's say Kriya Shema immediately before Nate, have Shemona Esrei right after Nate, because it's reason why that's what wants to say Shemona Esrei the earliest possible time. But if we start doing Tefillah, the Kriya Shema right before, therefore, in order to time everything, that we say Kriya Shema at the last available moment, right before Nate. It says, how do we know this concept? It says, you remove from Shemesh, you have fear right when the sun comes out. That's Krishna, Lomach Shemai. Because continue, the is talking about Mincha, should not be said after Shemai. We always see that Yaakov said in the name of Shemai, whoever says, right after Tefillah, won't be damaged that day. Seriously, what's damaged in the Gemara says, why? Because he had a monetary loss, he had to bring 1,000 to the king. People pay money to see a king. Rabbi says Gemara, he was such a good tefillah, and he was happy the entire day. He had a smile on his face. Hashem's face I tipped off that we say. Gemara in one shot says that you don't say that in the thought, otherwise it's like that's what you do tefillah. Or like your hand being stepped up. But since the hover with the day and in the tefillah, it's like part of Shemona Esrei, like Shemona says part of the body Yisrael. Shemona Esrei is because of the 18 film that David Amel had to correspond to the king. Yilu L'Ratzon is the capital Yukas 90. That's why it's Yilu L'Ratzon after Shemona Esrei and not before. Have a wonderful Rabbi is not you. The Gemara tells us a story. And Rabbi had really bad neighbors. So he died in the Dishadad. Glorious, famous wife told him that's not the way to do it. You're probably thinking, I'm Chatoim and Aretz. You should get rid of all the Chatoim. Yes, get rid of the sins, but don't get rid of the sinners. What you should do is daven that they should do tshuva. That daven that they should do tshuva and replace it with tshuva. A min once asked Uriah, how does the puzzle make sense in Navi? Rami Akara Shaloi Lada. Because she didn't give birth, she came out in a song. And she said, shut up. Look at the end of the puzzle. Lots and loved by the Gulula, there are going to be many more Klai Yisrael Yerushalayim than Edom. In fact, the word Akara is referring to that our children don't go into Gehenna, but your children. So the Rabbi explained to Abin, why is it that David Amelech put the parak of Avshalom, him and Avshalom, the third parak is Dylan, and the parak of him and Shaul is all the way at parak Zayin. It's not in order of how it happened. So he told them, we believe in God's called Smuchim. When a person is next to another person, or a parent is next to another parent, we learn something from it. We learn from the parent learning Malkai, which is parent base. If somebody might tell you, how is it possible that God is going to rebel against God's Baruch? I'll tell you, look, my own son rebelled against his father. Shimba Yichai explained in his Pazganesh Chai, he was Bachadma, the Soras Chesed al Shaina, the Mamel wrote about his father David. That he had look a coach later on in life about 5 times that he was in different worlds. One of them was the world in his mother's womb. He said Shira, he said a Baruch Hanafshi about it. When he came out and he looked at, gazed at the stars and the Mazals, he said another Baruch Hanafshi. And when he nursed, he also said a Baruch Hanafshi. Two shot them, because humans are different than animals. You nurse from a clean place, or you nurse not in the Baruch Hanafshi. And he said Shira when he had the falling of the Rishayim, and when he spoke about their death. Rashi Hassan says that it corresponds with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Neshama the 5 times. HaKadosh Baruch Hu fills the whole world, the Neshama fills the whole body. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees it, but he's not seen it. The Neshama sees it and is not seen. HaKadosh Baruch Hu feeds with fireness the whole world, the Neshama is the fireness the whole body. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is pure, he's pure, so is the Neshama. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sits in the inner rooms, so does the Neshama. So therefore, the person that has the Neshama within him should come and praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hanafshi, it says, my innards. The form is not like a human being. If an artist takes a picture on the wall, you can infuse it with life and in the shower where HaKadosh Baruch Hu not only can infuse it, we can infuse something within something, a baby that's within its mother, can infuse it with life. As Chana said, and we learn in Sire, there's no artist like our God. In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can create humans, and nobody can do anything similar. We learn the aim, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu outlives everything he creates, whereas an artist, usually his art outlives him. You want to know what happened in the story between Chizkiah and Shayo, who were both tzaddikim. Chizkiah was the king, Shayo was the Navi. They didn't want to visit each other. Each one held that they had more honor, the other one should come to them. So Baruch Hu made a compromise. He made Chizkiah really sick, and he told Shayo, go visit Chizkiah. So he went to visit him and he said, he makes Atom, you're going to die, the Lord and you're not going to live, which is a double logic. The word explains you're going to die in this world and you're not going to have a Olam Haba because you didn't do Puru, you didn't get married. Because they said, like, some of my that I'm going to have descendants that are not worthy. So, Yeshayahu told me the famous line, Bahadi Kashmir Rahman Allah, why are you getting involved in the Rabbi Shalom's business? Let him do his thing, you do your thing. So he said, okay, so give me your daughter, and our two chosim will be certain that I won't have bad descendants. So he told him it's too late. The Xer already happened. So Chizkiah got upset. He said, I feel even if a sharp sword is on your neck, you should never stop davening. And the word tells us that immediately Chizkiah took the Musar, he got up and went to the wall. What's the wall? The wall is his heart. He said within his heart. Or, lady says, he said something has to do with the wall. He said, if Isha Shunamis, with the story of Elisha, that Elisha decrees a mason to her son, and it is caused because she built him a wall, as Gemara is going to discuss later. So my grandfather, Shlomo, he built an entire something that shouldn't deserve a spus. Chizkiah told her, because Baruch Hu, his salat and stuff, the emes when showing that him and 60, I did everything. What did he do? Says the Gemara, an amazing thing. He was Simon who pulled of the tefillah. Lady says it means that he took the book of medicinal remedies and he buried it. As one says, Chizkiah did 6 things. 3 things, Rabbanan, Chachamim agreed with, and 3 not. He buried the book of Refois. He broke the copper snake that Moshe Rabbeinu made to heal people. People started doing Avodah Zarah. And when his father, the Rosh Achaz, died, he dragged his body in the streets out of benefit. Rope to show people what happens when you do Avodah Zarah. Those 3 things Chachamim agreed with. But what they didn't agree to is that when he plugged up the water of Yichon in order to thirst, to create that the soldiers of there should have water, they didn't agree to that. They said, let it go wrong with it. When the Chizkiah gave the door, there was the golden doors, they didn't agree to that. And when he did, people were afraid he made an extra month of the year. On the last day of Adar, he said that's not good because that last day could be Nisan, and because it could be Nisan, you don't do people are shut on that day. If somebody uses other people's testimony down, he says, I will answer you in the source of my forefathers, like Moshe Rabbeinu did in Abraham, he's answered in his own source. But Chizkiah used his own source. He said, answer me my source, etc. So they used the source of God. Now going back to the story of Isha Shunamis and Elisha, she said, let's make him a wall. So Machlokes, where did she put Elisha? She put him in an open Achsandra, and she had to build a wall to divide Achsandra. And then, what does Aliyah mean? Aliyah usually means in the attic. It means she put him in the best of her housing. Or the child, she put him in the attic. And she had to build a roof. So why is it called a kier, a wall? Because it's kiru, is a lesson of roofing. It says that she put a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp. Nor says, Elisha benefited from it. You're going to benefit from things that we give to you. But Shmuel would refuse faith if you come with his own little suitcase. Wherever he went, he had all his belongings, nobody could give him a thing. She knew more than her husband that Elisha was a coach. How did she know? She noticed that his flies put legs on his table. Another child is she noticed that his sheets were clean, they didn't have any carry on them. Whereas his Misharis, Genechazi, didn't have Dusha. He grabbed her inappropriately. Says Gemara that if a person holds a Chacham and gives from his own belongings to the Chacham, it's as if he's immaculate punished. Where's the three halachas in tefillah? First one is that you shouldn't stand in a high place when you daven. If you're immaculate for Sifra Hashem, there should be no haughtiness when it comes to daven. You're supposed to put your feet together like we do during Shemon Esrei, and you're not supposed to eat and drink before davening. If you do, it's as if you have gaiva and then you try to be mad with Shem Shammai. Shmuel said that was like Yeshua, that Kriya Shema said until 3 hours into the day. Bryce says that if you say Kriya Shema after this man, it's as if you were Mekayim become a Torah. But you should say Kriya Shema 2 before and 1 after. But Chris agrees to that. And one lashon, Chris argues with that. Now he says, somebody says Kriya Shema in the right time, has a bigger source than learning Torah. Have a wonderful day. As we learned, the pasuk says, "You must say Kriya Shema b'shach b'chol kumecha." When people go to sleep and when people get up. We try to take it a step further and they say, just like when you go to sleep, you're laying down. So if you say Kriya Shema Shel Arvis, you have to be in the laying position. If you say Kriya Shema Shel Shachris, you have to be standing up. Otherwise, the pasuk would say, "Ba'bayker ubar." They still say, "Wait a minute." The pasuk says, "The left of you must say Kriya Shema when you're walking on the way." Walking is not laying down; it's not even standing. Therefore, say still, you can say Kriya Shema when you're sitting, standing, laying, and even while you're working. All we agree that from the words of Shach B'chol you can learn a big thing. That somebody that's facing a mitzvah, he's preoccupied doing another mitzvah, he's pulled from saying Kriya Shema. Well, the left of Chalader teaches us that not only a person that's actually doing a physical mitzvah, but even somebody like a cousin who's harder in his machshava, his mind is preoccupied. He's also pulled from Kriya Shema since he's about to marry a psula. If he's marrying an almana, he's not occupied, and therefore he's chayim. You need a combination of two things. You need to be preoccupied, and it has to be with the mitzvah. So therefore, if somebody's about to lose his ship, it's sinking, that's not enough to give him a tour from saying Kriya Shema because it's not a mitzvah. And Abel, who's preoccupied, he just lost a loved one, and he's very bizarre. He's also chayiv in all mitzvahs besides tefillah, because tefillah is taking hair, and since he's on his head and he's inside, he's cut. Even though they still use the Belech Chavadera to teach us this concept that basic mitzvah you potter, nevertheless they learn the physical words of Belech Chavadera that it's talking about the person that's walking and not laying down. One tells a story where Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah were together. Rabbi Shmuel was laying down, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was standing. When the time came to say Kriya Shema, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah decided to lay down like the Shammai. Shmuel, who was laying down, jumped up to say Kriya Shema. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah told him, "You remind me of a mashal. Somebody had a beautiful beard, and he told him, look, your beard is beautiful." So he said, "Okay, let me cut it off." I was standing up and I laid down, and because I lay down, that's why you stood up. I give you a compliment, and you do the opposite of what I'm doing. So he said, "No, I am worried that people will see us and they'll say that Allah is like the Shabbat." What's the difference? Because they still say you could also lay down. But since you were standing and then you lay down, so it looks as if you pass like the Shabbat. So what is the halacha if you do like the Shabbat? So according to Rabbi Cheskel, it's okay, you're Yaitse. But according to Rabbi Yosef, you're not Yaitse at all. Similarly, we have that if somebody does a sukkah like Beisila, most of his body's inside the sukkah, but his cable's inside the house. According to Beisila, it's fine. The Shammai say if you do like Beisila, you're not Yaitse at all. So if you reverse that, you say if you do like Beis Shammai, Beisila will hold you didn't do anything. And according to Rav Nachman Yitzchak, not only did you not do anything, but you chayiv misa. You see the Mishnah, or Tarfin says, "I once put myself in danger in order to be yaitz like Bishamai." If I told him something would have happened to you, you would have deserved it. Mishnah tells us, based on the pasuk, "Sheva b'yayim l'Lakicha," you should say 7 brachas, 7 birkas Kriya Shema. How do you break it down? The Mishnah says, in the morning you say 2 brachas before Kriya Shema and 1 after. In the evening you say 2 before and 2 after. In the evening, the Munah, Emes Munah is a very long bracha, and Ashkiveinu, compared to Emes Munah, is considered short. Anytime Chachamim will misake a long bracha or a short bracha, a bracha that finishes with Baruch Atah Hashem, or doesn't finish with you're not doing the right thing. One of the brachas that was in the morning, we don't use the word Noiga because we want to say Cheshav, which is darkness, which is Laila. We want to mention the night during the bracha of the day. Just like we mentioned the daytime during the bracha of the night, where we say Gadol Ar B'nei Cheshav. According to Shmuel, what's the second bracha? Ahava Rabbah, like Nusach Ashkenaz. According to Chachamim, it's Havas Olam, like Nusach Sfar. Because it says, therefore, one should say Ahava Rabbah in the morning and Havas Olam at night. Like Nusach Ashkenaz, I guess, places war, Chachmei, Tzarfas Ashkenaz. Shmuel says that if somebody gets up early to learn, he should say Birkus Hatar. And if he said Kriya Shema with Birkus Kriya Shema, so Ahava Rabbah hinders him from saying Brings us Torah. When do you say brings us Torah? The Buddha says you want to say brings us Torah and Torah should be stopped. If you learn Chumash, but not even a medrash that tells you the halachas that come out of the Chumash. The Buddha says even medrash. The Buddha says you say brings us Torah even for Mishnah. And Rabbi says you say brings us Torah even for Gemara. And Rashi says because that's the Ikkur Torah. This is great for the Yavi people. The Gemara is the main part of Torah because from that halach comes out and it's the logic behind the Mishnah and it explains away the contradictions in the Mishnah, and sometimes to add and take off words of the Mishnah. Surah Metzor. Shmuel says, what bracha do you make on bringing Torah? Lazi you Torah. From the net, higher and something you finish off with a bracha. And Rabbi says, which it says is considered the most important bracha out of the three. Why? Because it gives a place that is powerful and a place of high Yisrael in the Torah. Therefore, since these are all important brachas, we say all three. After the Behanim brought the carbon covenant in the morning, and he salted the Ibarim, he's got to be on would announce, make one bracha. What is that one bracha? According to Shmuel, it's like a Rabbi, and according to Rav Shlokish, it's Ser Bar. And then they would say Aser Libras, and then they would say Shema and Shemayim B'Yomer, and then they would give three brachas to Klal Yisrael. They would say Emes V'Yatzik, and they would say the bracha B'Avodah, which is similar to say, just the ends of Shais Chadavai, or another bracha, and then they would say B'Yim Skehan. Rav Zrika proved that if you say Yotzer Or and not have a rabbi. The Shlokish says, from here you see that brachas are not matter. In other words, if there's two brachas together and you say one out of the two, you guys are not one. Similar, let's say, for tefillin, if you say just a bracha on Shliyad and not Shal Rosh, you only have one pair, or you can't put on the other one, you guys are. How does he prove it? The fact that they said one bracha, and if that one bracha, for instance, was Yotzer Or, then that's a great proof. Why? Because why did they say have a rabbi? Have a rabbi you can say all night long. There's no zman for it. But if they said I have a rabbi, then there's no proof because perhaps they said it when it was too early. The Yotzar is only when the light comes up, and maybe they said it later on. The Gemara is not telling the Gemara says perhaps they said both prophets. It was meant to say that it's not ma'akim, that the seder is not ma'akim. It's saying one before the other. It doesn't matter in what order. Have a wonderful day. Bracha is after debate. Although the Beis Hamikdash, they would say Aser Sadibros, the Chumrah was saying that outside of the Beis Hamikdash, we shouldn't say Aser Sadibros because the media would say that's the only part of the Torah that we have. Kriya Shema Aser Sadibros. Today, Aser Sadibros is so important that one should say in private, but not in public. There were 24 Mishmaros of Gehanim. Every week, a different Mishmar would take over the Beis Hamikdash. When the incoming Mishmar came into the Beis Hamikdash, the outgoing Mishmar would say another bracha, and they would say, Misha Shikin Shmoy Bebayis that says, Yashkin B'Neichem Ahava V'Achva V'Shalom B'Reis. The Gemara goes through a series of questions regarding brachas. If a person starts in Ma'ariv, he starts off thinking that he's saying Shachris. He says Yotzer Or, but he finishes off Ma'ariv Aravim. And the same thing in Shachris. He thinks he's saying Ma'ariv Aravim, and he finishes off Yotzer Or. In both cases, he's Yotzer because he finished off correctly. The reverse, if he started off correctly and finished off incorrectly, in Shachris he started off Yotzer Or, but he finished on Ma'ariv Aravim, and in Ma'ariv he started off Ma'ariv Aravim and finished Yotzer Or, he's not Yotzer. A person is holding in his hand a cup, and he thinks that it's beer, but in fact it's wine. So he starts saying Shahakal, and he finishes off Gafen, he's Yotzer. What about Bracha Freina? A person thinks that he ate bread, but in fact he ate dates. And he finishes off correctly. He started off breakfast Hamazon, but he finished off Mein Shalish, the Bracha Freina. He's Yotzer because even the breakfast Hamazon that he started off with will work for days because days can satiate. What happens, and this Gemara remains in a suffix, is he thought that he's holding wine, but in fact it was beer. So he started saying Hagafen, but he finished off Shahakal. The question is, do we go by the main part of the bracha or the latter part of the bracha? And therefore he would be Yotzer. If a person thought that he ate date, so he started saying a bracha Freina, and then he realized that he ate bread and he finishes off with the Birkas Hamazon, the Gemara remains in a suffix. The Lord says you can't prove anything from the halachas that we said by creation. Because according to Rav, since when it comes to Bikus creation, you finish off with the bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem, Amar V'Aravim, that's enough, that's a bracha in itself. According to Rabbi, Baruch Atah Hashem, Amar V'Aravim, or Yitzhar, it's not considered a bracha because you have to say Baruch Atah Hashem, like People Melech Chaylav, in order for it to be considered a bracha. Nevertheless, you can't prove anything from Bikus creation, because Bikus creation, when a person starts a bracha, he intends to mention the day and the night in the same bracha. So every bracha really is a bracha for the day and for the night, and therefore he's yotzei. A person does not say the yatzik in the morning and the emun at night. He's not yotzei the mitzvah of Kriya Shema Kikuna. It says in the pasuk, you have to give shachar in the morning and the evening. When you say Shmoneh the first two brachas, and by the last bracha, you bend your knees by Baruch, and by Yaakov, you bend your spine and your head down, all your vertebrae have to bend, and then by the word Hashem, you must start coming up. It's important to remember that by Baruch also, when you say Baruch Hu Es, Hashem, you start coming up. Rav Sheshes would bend his knees and bow down quickly, but when he said the word Hashem, he'd be like a snake, he'd pick up his head very slowly to show that it's not a burden on him to do the Kriya. So there's the Mitzvah, we know we say HaMelech HaKadosh and HaMelech HaMishpah. What if one forgets? It says HaKel HaKadosh or Melech HaYevzak HaMishpah. So according to Rabbi, and that's the halacha, he's not yotzei, and according to Rabbi Lazar, he's yotzei. If a person has the ability to daven for his friend and he doesn't daven for his friend, he's considered a sinner. If he has the ability to daven for an Chacham, he must do so until he feels sick, literally sick. He has to fast and daven until he becomes sick. A person is over an Aveira, and he's embarrassed by the Aveira, an amazing finish. Not only are they Muslim on that Aveira, but they're Muslim on all his Aveiras. And how we know this? We know this from Shaul. Shaul brought down Shmuel from Shemayim through the Oiv. And Shmuel says, why did you bring me down? So he says, I tried this, I tried that. But he never mentions I tried Durim Atumim, because he's embarrassed by the Aveira that committed, that he killed the Oiv with Durim Atumim. So I didn't know that Shaul was forgiven, because Shmuel tells him, tomorrow you'll go to battle, and if you go to battle, you'll be killed, you and your children, but you'll be with me. It says, the Gemara with me means my mechitza. In other words, Shaul was zoichet being an Eden with Shmuel Hanavi, which is a tremendous matter. Or, because the Gevinim, they said they'll forgive Shaul if Shaul gives them 7 of his sons that he killed. Obviously, they hated Shaul. And the pasuk ends off saying that Shaul was the Bechir Hashem. So the Gemara, that it wasn't the Gevinim that said it, was Hashem that announced it from Shemayim, Bechir Hashem, in other words, to forgive Shaul. The Gemara tells us that they wanted to institute that we should say Parshas Balak in Kriya Shema, because Parshas Balak has the pasuk Parash Shachar to Aryeh U'Chalavi. It's a beautiful pasuk, and it also includes the lashon of B'Shachar of Kumecha. The reason why they didn't institute it because the Tzibura is very long. And to say one pasuk, you also can't say because you can only say a full parsha from a pei to a pei to a samach. Why do we say parsha? Because it includes these amazing concepts. It includes the concept of all mitzvahs. Uschardim all mitzvahs. It includes the parsha mitzvahs, also mitzvahs. The Yitzias Mitzrayim, actually, Yitzias Mitzrayim. The words Achri Levavchem comes to tell us that you shouldn't think about minus. Achri Erechem comes to say that you shouldn't think in Averis. Atum Zoynim comes to tell you shouldn't think about Avodah Zarah. Says the Mishnah, and this is the famous Mishnah we say in the Haggadah, even though nighttime is not a time to put on tzitzis. Nevertheless, Rabbi Ben Azariah holds that you should say the parsha of tzitzis. Why? Because it says in the Bible, all the days of your life. Yimei Chayecha are the days you made. Kol Yimei Chayecha, that's your call, means the night. So you should say, Parsha says that. If I say no, Kol Yimei Chayecha comes to include the time of Mashiach. We're also going to say the Parsha of Tzitzis have a wonderful Bracha is Dafid Gimel. The Gemara tells us that once Mashiach comes, we're not going to be mentioning the Geula from Bavel, Horas, and Moshe, but we will be mentioning Mitzrayim. Though it's slightly muted compared to how we mentioned it today, because the main focus is going to be on the Geula from Goy Gumog, as the Pasuk says, Hineni Oisa Chadasha, I'm going to give you a brand new Geula. It's going to be so large that you're going to forget about the other Geulas. Now, Marshall, a person bumped into a wolf, and he has a great story to tell over to his friends. He bumped into a wolf, and you're saying, later on, he bumps into a lion, so he forgets about his first story, he tells him the second story about the lion. And after that, he bumps into a snake, forgets about the other two stories, and all he tells people is how he was saved from a snake, defeated the snake. Klal Yisrael is going to be so busy with the Geula of Gog and Magog, they're going to forget about all the other Geulas that they have. We know that the Baruch Hu changed Yaakov Avinu's name to Yisrael. The mother to call him Yaakov, we see we do that every day. The answer is because the Baruch Hu himself called Yaakov Avinu Yaakov after he changed his name. There's no answer. However, when it comes to Avram Avinu, the Torah tells us not to call him Avram. Therefore, his name was Avram, which means the father of his nation. Avram means the father of all nations. Because it isn't right, so Allah bin Asay to change his name and call him Avram. What about Sarah? Her name was Sarai, princess of her nation, Sarah, the princess of all nations. Mar tells us that the Baruch Hu told Avraham Avinu, this is what you need to call it. He didn't tell us. So therefore, if we call her Sarai, we're not over at this room. Now we finish the first parent of Shas, which should be Zochah, to finish all the program of Shas together. Says the Mishnah, if a Sofer was fixing the Sefer Torah, and the way you fix the Sefer Torah, you see the words yourself, and you fix. Now, if he had no intent to say the words, then he's not Yotze Kriya Shema, it's not time of Kriya Shema. But if he had intent to read it, he knew he was reading it, then he's Yotze, unless you hold like the Manorah that says, Mitzvahs Tzrichas Kavanah. And then you would have to have Kavanah to be Yotze the mitzvah of Kriya Shema. The word is going to be discussing the Mishnah, that is, different cases of somebody stopping in middle Shema to say hello to his friend or to answer. Everybody agrees that the guy's not his friend, the guy is a bad guy. But to kill him, and obviously you're allowed to say hello to him and answer him, smack him middle of Kriya Shema. If it's out of honor, kavod, so if it's between prakim, and we'll see what that means, then you're allowed to, according to a mayor, and according to Rabbi, and not only that, you're allowed to answer somebody, anybody, even if there's no honor in that. In the middle of the period, between the middle of the period, according to a mayor, you're not allowed to answer, but according to Rabbi, you're allowed to answer. What is Bein HaPrakim? Bein HaPrakim means between the two brachas of Kriya Shema before Kriya Shema, between the second bracha of Kriya Shema and the pasuk of Shema, between the parsha of Shema and Shemaya, between the parsha of Shemaya and Vayomer, between Vayomer and the Yatzah. According to Rabbi, you don't stop between Vayomer and the Yatzah. Why is the parsha of Shema first? It's not in the right order. In the Torah, the first parsha is Vayomer. The answer is because first we want to do Om Shemayim, and that's in the parsha of Shema. So then why is Vayomer Shemaya second? Vayomer should be second. And the answer is because Vayomer Shemaya is talking about Torah, and Torah is day and night, whereas the parsha of Vayomer is only during the day. Rabbi holds that Kriya Shema must be said only in Lashon HaKodesh because it says Vayomer as is. Although we already know that you can't say Kriya Torah in any language, it has to be in Lashon HaKodesh. But there's a Havamina that the Rabbi would darshan like Chachamim. Chachamim say the word Shema. Shema is a Lashon of hearing. Any language that you hear it in, Chacham holds you can say Kriya Shema in English. Comes Rabbi and says, no, Kriya Shema has to be said in Lashon HaKodesh. So what does Rabbi do with the word Shema? He says the halacha is that you must hear the words coming out of your mouth. And Chacham hold you yotze even if you don't hear the words coming out of your mouth. And Rabbanan take the word Vachayu and they learn that if you mix up the words Shemoya im instead of im Shemoya, you're not yotze, it has to be in order. Rabbi learns that from the Taik of Hadvar. We have a three-way machlokes. Where do you have to have kavanah, the proper intent, in order to be yotze? If you don't have that proper intent, you're not yotze. According to Rabbi, it's just the first pasuk. And therefore, and Rabbi holds that's the halacha, and that's how we pass it. So a person just has to hold the first pasuk, and he had some fineness, if he didn't say the rest of Krishma, he's yotze halacha. According to Rabbi Eliezer, you must say the first three psukim of Shema, the kavanah, as it says, va'ela. And therefore, they hold that you have to stand. In other words, if you're walking like Bisilo, you must say Krishma while you're walking. The first three psukim you must stand still in order to have, you must have kavanah, because it says Alevavecha, and therefore you hold that you have to stand still and say the whole first parashah so you have kavanah. Once it says Alevavecha, that until that point you have to read it and have kavanah, but from that point on, you could just read it without kavanah. And you're yaitze. You should have kavanah, but if you don't, you're yaitze. What about the fact that in the second verse it says, Alavavtem, the daber bum, seemingly you have to have kavanah. So you want to know, that comes to tell us the halacha that your tefillin yad should be opposite your heart. Rabbi Yosha holds that up until that point, Alavavtem, you have to have kriya kavanah, but past that point, you have to have kavanah. And the words "l'daber bam" come to teach us that we're talking about Torah, and the pasuk is telling us, "In the matter of b'neichem, l'daber bam." You must teach your children Torah so that your children can talk and learning. It says the Gemara in the pasuk of Shema, when you say echad, if you lent it the dalit, it's very hard to do it as Ashkenazi. It's easy to do it with your money. Then God gives you arichas yom. As he says, as long as you don't say the ches really quickly. Ches has a comment that chod. If you say quickly, it might sound like a shema. You shouldn't do that. Okay, Rabbi saw Rabbi Yirmiyah saying the word chod very, very long. So he said, listen, the only thief you have is the thing in your head that the Baruch was one in Shemayim in the Aretz and in the four ruchos. There's no need to be my God. Rabbi would teach his Talmidim Torah from morning to evening. He had no time to say Krishma. He was actually put him to. So what he would do is he would put his hand on his eyes and just say one pasuk, the first pasuk of Shema Yisrael. And his machlok is whether or not later on Rebbe would repeat the entire Krishma. We know one thing. We know that Rebbe would say over this Talmidim every single day and talk about the Tzis Mitzrayim. Either because he wanted to be Yotzei in Tzis Mitzrayim, or he wanted to be master in Tzis Mitzrayim in the proper time. Have a wonderful day. Bracha is Daf Dalet. If you or if you know somebody else that might be interested in a Daf Yomi share that's entertaining, fun, ishmak, with a lot of visual aids, search for our share online on YouTube under Rabbi Daf Yomi or Eli Stefanski, and come see for yourself why, since the beginning of Brachas, over 1,000 views per share. We learned in the Mishnah that there are certain situations where you're allowed to ask or tell somebody hi, say shalom to somebody, and answer it. Says the Gemara, if you can do that in Kriya Shema, then certainly you can do that in the middle of Hallel, which Hallel is only the Rabbanan, and Kriya Shema is the Reisa. Although Hallel is the Pursuit, nevertheless, you can compare it to Kriya Shema. Now, the Gemara qualifies that. If you're saying a Hallel Shalom, meaning a Yom Tov where you have to stay a full Hallel on Hanukkah, then you can only say hello to somebody, Beina Prokem. It's between paragraphs and not in the middle of the paragraph. However, if you're saying a half a Hallel, like in Rosh Chodesh, Talmud, then you can say hello to somebody, answer them in the middle of the paragraph. The fact that Rabbi didn't answer to Rav Bar Shava is because he didn't think he was hush enough for him. It wasn't an issue of covenant. In fact, they pass him that in our day, since people understand that you're not going to answer them, you're in the middle of Hallel, you're in the middle of Krishma, so we don't have this concept of Shoylo Meshach covenant. Two halachas in regard to tasting food. If you're tasting a food that's less than a revius, and it's on a tightest complex of showing what tightest we're talking about, you're allowed to taste it on a fast day. Since you accepted the fast, that you won't be eating, you didn't accept the fast, that you won't be benefiting having enough. And also, if you taste food, you don't have to make a bracha. It's also to get up and go to your friend's house to say hello to him before you daven. That will be a pita and a benchmark. If you go to your friend, or you're having to go to your friend for something else, then it's okay to say hello to him. It's also last you're not allowed to take care of business or your personal things before davening. So I'm venture to say, and this applies to me as well, it's probably also to look at your emails and WhatsApps, etc. before davening. The Gemara says an amazing thing though, that if one has become a good Baruch Hu, says, you know what, I'll take care of my business after davening. Baruch Hu isolates Racha. Baruch Hu takes care of his business. The Gemara says that if somebody sleeps for 7 days without having a dream, he's a rat. He's considered wicked. From the same passage we learned that if somebody satiates himself with Torah, so full of Torah, that they won't tell him any of the surahs during that day. We had a machlokes in the Mishnah. What's considered bin aprokim? The machlokes between the Elef Shmuel, Emes, and Viyatim. Is that considered between the prokim? Rabbi says that's not. You're not allowed to stop there. That's not allowed. Why? Because he brings the pasuk Hashem Elokim Emes. So it's one continuation. Once a person says that the Shema Hashem Elokim Emes, does he have to repeat the word Emes again? According to Rabbi Yochanan, you must repeat it again. Or to Rabbi, you don't repeat it. Rabbi brings a very interesting lesson. Rabbi heard someone was telling me to say Hashem Elokim Emes. Emes Viyatim. So he said, well, Emes Tafsi behind. This guy is grabbing onto every Emes, doing the wrong thing. Once you start the third parsha, that is by Ma'ariv, you start, you must finish. According to Rab, what does it mean to start? You say, that's it. Once you get to Bamarta Aliyam, you have to continue the whole parsha. But that's not considered a start. And therefore, if you just say that, you can skip everything and go all the way to Hashem and take of Emes. Rabbi says that our minute is you start, you say the beginning of the passage, and therefore that creates a feed for you to finish, and that's why you finish the entire parsha of Ayah. Rabbi says that you say the third parsha, then you're mechuyev to say Emes ve'emunah. But if you don't, and this is a Ma'ariv, then you have to say, instead of the third parsha, you have to say, Boidem anachnu lo Hashem, sh'tiseinu be'eretz Mitzrayim, took us out of Mitzrayim, took us out of them, and redeemed us from slavery, while Sisalam Nisim Kurs Ayam, he did tremendous things for us on the water, the Sharaloch, and we say to you, what did we say to you? Micha, Boicha, Boidem Hashem, and then you can keep from that point on all the way to Gai Yisrael and Nefesh V'Nefesh. Shmuel Yochai says, not only is the parsha of Shema, all Malchus Shamayim, that's why we say it first. But the Parsha Shema has three concepts in it. Vilmoy, the Lamed, the Lasos. It says in the passage, the Bar Tabam, that teaches us to learn Torah. The Lamed, that teaches others, Shinat Levanecha. And Lasso is to do, to take action, to Shartam, put on Tefillin, Mustaftam, Yiray Mezuzah. And that's why it's before Barim Shemayim. Shemayim only has the Lamed, which is the Matam, is Benekam, Davar Bam. The Lasso is, again, Shartam, Mustaftam. And finally, the final Parsha of Yomer is only to do. Take action. Boss for them tzitzis that make tzitzis. One must put on tefillin and only afterwards say Kriya Shema. The fact that Rav, one time, we saw him saying Kriya Shema before tefillin, you must say it's because his shliach, the person that went to get his tefillin, took a long time and he was worried that he's going to miss my Kriya Shema, so therefore he said Kriya Shema first. The fact that Rav would get up really early, he'd wash his hands, make Kriya Torah, and teach Torah, which is an asiyah, says Rashi, and then only afterwards he would put on tefillin and then create Shema. You can be Deutsch and say there's no writer from them. That's because the reason why I did Torah before Kriya Shema is because it wasn't the time of Kriya Shema at all. So why would we bring the story for a different reason? Say that we had about 4 machlokes. When do you say Kriya Torah? From here you see that Rav said Kriya Torah even on Mishnayos. If somebody's digging a grave, he's replacing the mitzvah. He's called from all mitzvahs, including Kriya Shema, Tefillin, Shunesh. He's digging the grave with another person, and they can switch off. One can come out of the grave, and he'll say, put on Tefillin, Kriya Shema, and Tefillin, and then he'll switch with his friend. Rabbi Shimon ben Karcha says that in Kriya Shema, when it comes to reading, you say all Malchus Shamayim, which is Shema, and then you do Asiyah. But he admits that when it comes to physical Asiyah, Tefillin comes before Kriya Shema, which is all Malchus. The person says Kriya Shema. Without tefillin on, according to Ula, he made in his record. It's testifying falsely because Kriya Shema says you should wear tefillin. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, you're not performing the mitzvah. You're not doing the mitzvah as it was meant to be. It's a mashal as if somebody brought a carbon oil without bringing the mincha that's associated with it, or it's vachim, without misafim. Have a wonderful day. Rocha is after his love. The reference says if one wants to complete the process of all Malchus Shamayim, which entirety, which refer and say Kriya Shema, put on tefillin, and then daven Shema. All that, it's as if building is there, it's not a permanent pocket is there. Since Rabbi, not only that, it's as if because needs to curse those that search for water before saying Kriya Shema. Shema has this man. You might miss this man. When Ezra, on the other hand, doesn't look for water because the man is much longer. You should look for water up until a person, which is approximately 2 miles, in the direction that you travel. If you go in reverse, make a U-turn and look for water, and if there's water, all you have to go up until a hill, which is approximately 4,000 feet. The Mishnah says that if a person doesn't hear the Kriya Shema in his own ear, it wasn't Mashmiya law, Tanakama says, Yaitza, Yossi says he's not Yaitza. It's a very long sugya. It's almost complicated and brings in 5 different rights and rights. And I'll try to make it very simple. In Maskana, we have these 3 opinions. That mayor, who's the most, says, don't hear what you say, but if you do Yishma, with different prophets, your opponent, you are Yaitza with Chachila. In other words, you start out initially saying it without hearing it in your ear, then Yaitza. On the opposite side, you have Rabbi Yosef, who says, when it comes to Kriya Shema, if you don't hear it in your ear, you're not Yaitza, even after the fact. They have the middle shot. So Yosef ben Azariah, who happens to be Rabbi's Rebbe. Yosef ben Azariah says, you are Yaitza, only the Yaitza. If you want to be Yaitza with Chachila, you should hear it in your ear. How did these Mishnahs match up with the following 5 pieces? We have our Mishnah that discusses Kriya Shema. That's their right. So in Kriya Shema, we have all 3 sheets. You have Rabbi who says, you don't have to hear it in your ear. You only have to be mechaber, because it says, it's in your heart. You have Rabbi who says that you have to hear it in your ear, because it says Shema. You must hear it. And they have Rabbi Yosef with the middle sheet of, you should look at people here in your ear, but if you don't, you're going to. And then we have a rice that brings a person who's deaf, but he can speak. And he says a bracha on him. One rice says he's only going to be able. That will be the only point for this. But now the big question is how does review the thing? You want to try to say that perhaps he says that the mayor is either Yaitzi or without hearing it. As far as a student, it's like Yehuda holds it from Rabbi, who wasn't Messiah, the Yehuda Yaitzi. So this rice says that you're Yaitza if you're deaf and speak. Yaitza only the evidence when the Truma which is the bottom, only what it doesn't. There's another rice when it comes to the deaf person who can speak. And that's what Shimon has to say. That you're Yaitza even with a feeling. That was the goal according to him. And then you have the halacha previous. Previous halacha is very rice. It says that you should not bench in your heart. That means that you should do so. Do it. You have to do Yaitza. And that will be looking at something. And finally, we have to teach some people. The Priest of Gila says that the Sarah should show the Torah, the secrets of Gila, but did so, the Sarah did so according to Yehuda, plus Azariah, you are Yoitzin, or Sarah. Same thing is applied to Chacham. Rashi says that comes like Sarah, that is a Gila. You should not be most other people with Gila. But if you did so, Yoitzin the Ever. But Shoita, if you Ever, you're not Yoitzin. So he says there's another shear that is the fiddle. The result that he's completely crushing Chachila to be Yaitzi other. That's super. Then the Gemara says that it's possible that Yaitzi you hold by Kriya Shema, that you are not Yaitzi at all. You could agree by the Rabbanon, by let's say Truma, the Pharish, by Megillah, that you are Yaitzi with the Evan. Gemara says that just like the womb takes in Zerah, and then after it's baby, so to bring, takes in dead, and to leave his Hanesic bodies to be alive. Just like the womb takes in, but it's quiet, but when it comes out, the baby comes out, there's a lot of emotion, and screaming, celebration. So the December, ready, the body goes in, it's a lot of crying, the body comes out alive, and his Hanesic is going to be a huge celebration. This is the source for this amazing in Torah. It says in the Pasuk, just like a river can take a person out of his home and make him tar, so to the Halden, referring to the message, take a person and take him out of Haifa, he has a virus and bring him into Sufis. We learned in the Mishnah that the person said Krishma, but he wasn't a doctor. What does that mean? He said all the words, but perhaps two of the words were connected to each other. The American's examples were the end of one word ends with the same letter as the next word begins, like Al Level Bethel. Both Al ends with the Lamin, Level starts with the Lamin. If you say it quickly, it sounds like Al Level Bethel. Al is supposed to stop in between. If you say the Siddur, usually stop between all these words. And we learned that from the Mazik. It should be Libud Tam. The word brings another example, like Esef Sadfa, two bases, Vantem Mahera, two names. The place brings down also the Farah Af. If you say it quickly, it sounds like Farah. So you should make it stop. The Farah Af. It also speaks about this is two, which people are in Mazik. This is science. This is two. It should sound like this. If somebody is very careful with the way he says Krishma, he will lower the temperature in the air. And the Gemara finally says at the end, Sasha, Siva Kama. There's a Hadamina that perhaps you have to see the instructions regarding Krishma. How to put on your tefillah, how to write, how to do the mezuzah. Maybe you should only say something that have to do with your Shemayim. Where it says, no, that's only by a site that we take up all the instructions that we just put in the person. So it says always. And there's no Zereshava between site and our sukkah. It says Sav Tom, so you can see the Tama, wonderful. Rabbi is back to Zion. The Gemara tells us that Rabbi Amir and Rabbi Asi were building a chuppah for their friend Rabbi Lazar was getting married that day. Rabbi Lazar said, I'm a fast, let me go learn Torah now, and I'll come back with what I learned. So he came back with the following. So if a person makes a mistake in Milah Krishma, let's say he misses a word, he must go and repeat the entire Shema. Let's say a person says Visharecha, and he's not sure where he's holding. He's holding at the end of the first parasha that has Visharecha. Perhaps he's holding at the end of the second parasha. He must go to the first parasha. According to Rashi, the following halacha applies to the third parasha. In other words, the third parasha a person knows better than the other two parashas. Therefore, if he's concerned that perhaps he missed a word or something in the third parasha, don't be concerned. You know it really well, and you probably said every single word. You don't have to. It says in the Mishnah, if you have a worker who's picking fruit from a tree, or even his boss, and they're on top of a tree, and the time of Kriyashma comes, you're allowed to say Kriyashma on top of a tree, provided that the first pasuk of Kriyashma, they stop working and they concentrate on the first pasuk. According to other Rishonim, they have to concentrate on the entire first paragraph. When it comes to Shemona Esrei, they must come off the tree and have Shemona Esrei where it's sturdy and they're not concerned, they'll be able to have the proper kavod. If it's a tree that's really sturdy and has a lot of branches, such as an olive tree or a fig tree, they're allowed to stay and remain on top of the tree. The Gemara makes a distinction between a worker who receives a salary for his work and a worker who only receives food. One who receives a salary has to be a lot more careful with his time and how he uses it, and he shouldn't cause a loss to his boss. So therefore, when he got a Shemona Esrei, he should only say the Shemona Esrei known as having name. It's a shortened Shemona Esrei where you say the first three brachas and the last three brachas, and everything in between is shortened to 3 to 4 words. Like you see the picture, this is from a settler given to servicemen in the English Army in 1940. When you say Birkas HaMazon, you only say 2 out of the 4 brachas. You say the first one completely, and the second and third bracha you combine together. The fourth one is only the Rabbanan, not the same. When it comes to Birkas HaMaiti, since it's only the Rabbanan, they don't even wash and say the bracha. Something that works for his food, you should be careful not to be a chazan. That's a waste of time for the owner, and he shouldn't do Birkas Kohanim, he shouldn't do it. As we learned in the beginning of the Sefta, I say the mitzvah culture and mitzvah. Somebody is occupied with any mitzvah. He doesn't have to say Kriyashma, because it says the Shema of every Sefer. And from where we left the Chavaderech, we learned that a chassan is not physically doing a mitzvah, but he's preoccupied in his head with the mitzvah of marrying a basula. Therefore, he is putter from Krishna because he has a combination of two things. He's preoccupied and it's a mitzvah. Therefore, a person who's preoccupied but not in a mitzvah, for instance, if his ship is sinking and he's very occupied with that, but it's not a mitzvah, he's chayim Krishna because he's obligated to take the preoccupation out of his head. If, for instance, he's in Abel, he lost a loved one and he's preoccupied, that's also not a mitzvah and he's chayim in all conditions. The person who marries a Ramana, he's not preoccupied. Yes, it's a mitzvah, but he's not preoccupied, and therefore he's kind of in Kriya Shema. The Gemara tells us that Gamliel himself, when he got married, he did say Kriya Shema because he knew about himself that he could be mechaven. And the Gemara says that anybody who's mitzvah, has a chazaka, and he's a chacham, and he could be mechaven during Kriya Shema, he's allowed to say Kriya Shema. But anybody that's not mitzvah, according to Gamliel, that's considered gaiva. He has haughtiness. He says, "Oh, I could be mechaven." The Chacham say that he could say Kriya Shema regardless. And although he just lost a loved one, he's usher to bathe, unless he's what we call a business, somebody who's spoiled, let's take care of himself, and he's not bathing for enjoyment, but rather he can live without. And that is in a time that the issur of rechitza, of bathing oneself, is the Rabbanah. The first day is the deraisa. But the first night, according to some, and after the first night, according to everybody, it's only the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan were makir when it came to an instance. If a person loses a slave, we don't stand in the rows that we stand in front of Babylon and say Hamakom Menachem. We don't say Hamakom Menachem, and we don't make the bracha of Rechava, which is by the Suda, the first Suda of Avraham. What do we say to somebody who loses a slave? We say Hamakom Menachem like we do for any other object we want by the Jews. There's no espada that you give on a slave. According to Rabbi Yossi, if the Eved, the slave, was a kosher, then you could say, "Oy ish toiv neman v'nehena mi'yoy." Wow, what a great person he was, and he was trustworthy, and he was nehena. He worked hard, and that's how he earned a living. Chacham disagree. They say, if that's what you say about a slave, what is left to say about any kosher Jew? And therefore, you don't say any hesped on a slave. You don't call a slave Mister or Abba or Ima, which was in those days a way to call somebody in a nice way, unless this slave is a Fashana slave, and then you can give him that kind of service. We only have 3 others. Avram Yitzchak Yaakov. We have 4 imays, and we don't have any more. In other words, you can't call one of the Shvatim Ruvain one of their others, because the Hashivas is up to 3 others and 4 imays. Whoever is careful with Kriya Shema and Shemona Esrei, says the Gemara, will have Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba. And now the Gemara brings many different tefillos that the Amoraim and the Tanaim would say after Shemona Esrei in order to make the Shemona Esrei their own. And the time permitting, we'll go through most of them. Rabbi Lazar would say the following: that we should have a hava v'achva reis shalom. In other words, we should have peace and harmony, achdos, and we should have many talmidim, and that the future should show a lot of hope. And we should have Gan Eden, and we should have the Yitur Taiv, and we should wake up in the morning and find that we have Yerushalayim, and we should find all our needs. The Yochanan used to say, peek at our shame and see how hard we have in our life, and you should use rachamim and ois and chasidus, and you should give us graciousness, and you should use good and give us an osefa. Rabbi Zera would say, we shouldn't sin, we shouldn't be shameful. Rabbi would say, our occupation should be Torah, and we shouldn't have pain in our heart, and we shouldn't have dim eyes. And Rab would say the famous davening that we say on Rosh Chodesh, long life, Chaim Shel Shalom, Shel Toiva, Shel Bracha, Shel Parnasa, Shel Tzatzonos, Chaim Shel